Queer News and Journalism is a Gay 45 original podcast published every week on Thursdays, where we come together to comment on the topics in the weekly queer news published by our newsletter, The Nine. Subscribe on gay45.com to get the latest news every week. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today, well, it's not just about running through headlines. We want to really understand the global currents shaping the fight for queer rights. We've pulled together a whole range of stories from Gay 45, stretching across different continents. We're looking at that crucial intersection of justice, politics, and how communities push back.
Yeah, and the material this week it's intense. It really jumps around. You've got these heartbreaking institutional scandals in Europe, then incredibly brutal violence in West Africa, and then suddenly these big legislative fights in Asia and Eastern Europe. So to make sense of it, we really need to look for the patterns, right? What does all this diverse stuff tell you, our listener, about where human rights are at and, the nature of resistance today?
Okay, let's unpack this. We really have to start with some of the toughest stories. The ones about justice and accountability, highlighting alleged harm within institutions, sometimes hidden for decades.
We should probably start in Austria. The humanitarian world there is, frankly, reeling. It's about the legacy of Hermann Gemeiner, the founder of SOS Children's Villages. I mean, that's a massive global charity. The organization itself confirmed allegations that Gemeiner sexually and physically abused at least 8 boys. And this was over a long period, from the 50s through the 80s.
But the part that just makes you furious,
Yeah.
the part that shifts it from one person's awful actions to a real institutional failure, is that they admitted their own internal documents confirming these allegations go back to 2013.
Right.
That sounds like a decade of cover-up.
Exactly. That's what makes it Austria's most damaging humanitarian scandal. You have to ask, why would a huge global organization knowingly keep that quiet for 10 years? It just shows how deeply ingrained these systems can be for protecting the institution itself, instead of the vulnerable people they're meant to serve. And the fallout? Well, victims got compensation, though it varies a lot, like 5,000 to 25,000 days, and Vienna's even thinking about renaming Hermann Gemeiner Park, trying to cut ties with that legacy.
That scale of institutional failure is it's overwhelming. But the violence isn't always buried in the past, is it? It's happening right now. We see that with the immediate life-or-death dangers people face in Nigeria. We have that devastating story of Hillary, a young gay man who died after what's described as a homophobic assault in Port Harcourt.
Yeah, and this is a tragedy that's really rooted in, extreme social prejudice combined with a lack of legal protection. The reports say Hillary was allegedly lured into a meeting, beaten up, and then thrown from a 2-story building. Rights activists are calling this a keto-related death. And for listeners who might not know, keto is Nigerian slang for this horrible practice where LGBTQ plus folks are targeted, often through dating apps or social media. They're lured in, and then face robbery, blackmail, violent assault, or even murder.
And the sheer horror of this is amplified because it's the second reported keto death in just 2 weeks.
That speed, that intensity of violence, it's terrifying. And it's all happening under the shadow of the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act from 2013. That law doesn't just criminalize relationships, it actively fosters a social and legal climate where this kind of targeted, localized violence can just, flourish without real consequences.
Before we shift gears slightly, we also need to just briefly mention that ongoing investigation in Germany. It involves the well-known Berlin drag performer Jurassica Parka, Mario Olszewski.
Right. That's the one launched by Berlin prosecutors. It came from a referral from the U.S. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. The investigation is looking into suspicion of distributing and possessing child sexual abuse material, apparently linked to an IP address. But it's really crucial, as Gay 45 noted, to stress this is ongoing. No formal charges have actually been filed at this point. So if we sort of connect these dots, these judicial realities, to the bigger political picture, you see this constant dynamic, don't you? Progress in some places, and then really brutal pushback happening almost at the same time in others. It's this political tug of war. Steps forward met with immediate, strong reactions.
And we do have some really meaningful steps forward to talk about. Look at South Korea, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, same-sex marriage is still illegal there, but their big 5-yearly population and housing census. It included a change that's symbolic, but I think pretty significant. For the first time, same-sex couples can register as spouse or cohabiting partner. That's official government recognition of different family types.
Yeah, that's a definite signal. And you see a similar kind of historical recognition happening in the UK. King Charles unveiled an open letter, which is the first national memorial for LGBT plus armed forces veterans. It commemorates service members who faced terrible stigma before the ban on their service was finally lifted back in 2000. It's a powerful symbolic gesture towards, righting historical wrongs.
Then you have these steps that feel more pragmatic, maybe partial, which brings us to Poland. The new center-left government there introduced a draft law for partnership agreements.
Yeah.
That feels like a pretty big deal in the Polish context. It grants some really important rights, things like joint tax filing, inheritance tax exemption, getting medical information about your partner.
But here's the political calculation, right? It's very clearly a compromise. It stops short of marriage deliberately. Partners can't adopt kids together. They can't take a common surname. So yeah, it's a practical win for a lot of couples, but it sidesteps that bigger, tougher political fight over actual marriage equality.
And even this compromise isn't a sure thing.
No, President Karol Nawrocki has already signaled he's against anything that looks like an alternative to marriage. So, it's progress. But it's negotiated progress built on concession.
And then you contrast that kind of limited, negotiated step forward with the full-blown propaganda backlash that's brewing in Bulgaria. The Council of Europe put out a really stark warning about Bulgaria's draft anti-LGBTQ+ bill. This bill would actually ban exposing kids to non-biological ideas about gender, and it would criminalize gender-affirming care for minors.
Yeah, this is explicitly dangerous political stuff. The Council of Europe's commissioner didn't mince words. They directly compared this bill to Russia's infamous gay propaganda laws. This isn't just about healthcare access, though that's obviously critical. By clamping down on expression and targeting education, this kind of bill tries to basically remove LGBT plus people from public life. It uses child protection as a cover to suppress free expression and education. It's a direct threat to democratic participation itself.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, I think. If institutional power is so often part of the problem, whether it's cover-ups like in Austria or legislative pushback like Bulgaria, let's look at where power from the ground up is making a difference. We're seeing communities fight back, both physically on the street and also online. Real resilience.
Moldova is such a striking example of that physical, local resistance. You have the Queer Cafe in Chisinau, which is managing to stay open as one of the very few visible LGBTQ plus spaces in the whole country. And this is happening while threats are escalating. There's vandalism. There's rising anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric that seems strongly connected to pro-Russian groups trying to destabilize things there.
Right. And when you layer on that local sentiment, there was a 2024 study showing 80% of Moldovans surveyed said they didn't want a queer person living in their neighborhood. That just underlines how incredibly brave and vital that cafe is. It's literally a hub of resistance, like they call it. It's the place people can go when the whole political climate is trying to make them disappear.
And then, moving from that small, vital space to something massive. You look at Taiwan Pride, organizers said 150,000 people turned out. That makes it the biggest pride in Asia. And their theme this year was Beyond Links, More Than Clicks, which I thought was really powerful, a call for real physical connection, moving beyond just online activism. Taiwan, since legalizing same-sex marriage in 2019, it really has become this beacon, this safe haven in the region.
That leads us right into the digital world, doesn't it? And this immediate clash we're seeing between using tech for protection versus, well, using it for degradation. Look at Brazil. The Ministry of Human Rights launched this thing called the Platform of Respect. It uses an AI tool, Alethea, specifically to monitor anti-LGBTQ plus hate speech and disinformation online.
Yeah, and this is such a double-edged sword. On one hand, supporters see it as strengthening protection. They link it back to Brazil's 2019 Supreme Court ruling that basically equated anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination with racism, so there's a legal basis. But on the other hand, critics are raising serious alarms. Using AI to scan and flag online language, which can be so nuanced, right? Full of irony or sarcasm, it carries a huge risk of suppressing perfectly lawful speech.
That warning from activists that this could end up using artificial intelligence to hunt political dissidents, that's chilling. How do you balance the obvious urgent need to combat hate speech online with the danger of creating massive state surveillance and controlling political debate?
It's the ultimate tightrope walk in our digital age, isn't it? And that potential for digital degradation becomes even clearer when you contrast Brazil's approach with how authorities use public shame in places like Indonesia. We saw that Surabaya raid. 34 men accused of being at a gay party were literally paraded barefoot and handcuffed in front of the media.
Yeah, using public humiliation like that is a deliberate intimidation tactic. Rights groups immediately pointed out it violates constitutional guarantees of dignity and privacy. Even though same-sex relations aren't actually illegal nationwide in Indonesia, the police frequently use the 2008 anti-pornography law to target LGBTQ plus people. These raids become public spectacles designed purely for shaming and spreading fear. We always like to finish up by looking at the culture, the art, the ideas that both reflect what's happening and sometimes drive the movement forward. And this week has some significant cultural moments. First, we have to note the passing of the Swedish actor Björn Andresen. He starred in Death in Venice back in 1971. He died aged 70.
His story is really powerful, but also quite cautionary, isn't it? About fame hitting someone so young and about objectification. He was only 15 when the director famously called him the most beautiful boy in the world. And as Gay 45 mentioned, that label it shadowed him his entire life. He became the symbol of idealized, almost untouchable beauty, often completely against his own will. It really forces you to think about how society and art can consume and objectify youth.
On a different note, thinking about cultural power and resistance, there's the enduring impact of the film BPM, Beats Per Minute. It won the Grand Prix at Cannes a few years back, and it still feels so relevant. It's such a stirring but also really unsentimental portrait of ACT-UP Paris, right in the thick of the AIDS crisis.
Yeah, that film just captures the raw urgency of activism, doesn't it? And the intimacy of love and loss happening side by side. Plus the sheer political struggle, demanding action when governments were just failing people. It weaves together that collective resistance with this fierce queer desire. It's honestly one of the most powerful films about resilience and having moral clarity, even when facing death.
And finally, let's touch on a piece of radical thought that kind of provides a critical lens for all those political compromises we were just talking about. It's the book Toward the Queerest Insurrection by Mary Nardini Gang. This is a manifesto, and it's completely unapologetically anti-assimilationist.
Right, and it's such a vital counterpoint. It frames queer not as an identity that's looking for the state's acceptance, but as a territory of tension that's actively resisting the whole state apparatus. So this kind of thinking directly challenges the usefulness of those partial victories we discussed earlier, like the Polish partnership agreements or even South Korea's census recognition.
So their argument would basically be that things like military inclusion or limited civil unions are just traps, capitulations to a system that's fundamentally harmful, and that the goal should be total rupture, not integration.
Exactly. It puts all those mainstream political efforts under a really intense spotlight. It reminds us there's this powerful, uncompromising stream within the broader movement that believes true liberation means dismantling the structures of power, not just finding a comfortable place within them.
And that fundamental tension between achieving rights through compromise versus demanding power through rupture is maybe perfectly captured by our quote of the week. It's from Justin Torres. Yeah, you got rights. What you don't got is power.
That quote just nails the synthesis of this week's global news, doesn't it? We saw symbolic recognition in the UK memorial, South Korea census, and we saw significant legislative progress, like potentially in Poland. But those wins are constantly up against violent backlash. The keto deaths in Nigeria are a horrific example, an institutional failure, like the scandal in Austria clearly shows. The core global struggle seems to be this fight for recognition versus the fight for actual power, the power to control your own life, your own safety.
Which leaves us with this final thought, something for you to maybe chew on. If that radical anti-assimilationist critique holds water, do steps like Poland's partnership agreements actually end up hurting the long-term cause by making compromise seem normal? Or are they absolutely essential pragmatic steps needed right now for people's immediate relief and safety? You can also listen to any of our articles. Visit gay45.com to read more quality journalism.